some of the oligarchs who've now changed sides. But it is a very interesting thing that some things change in the world and some things never change. And this concept of, you know, when you dine with a ruler, know that you're in a different situation and that there are different rules that apply. And again, it's you'll see, it's not a matter of, hey, look, this is right, this is fair, but this is the way it is. And again, you'll see, there's not an excuse for, for anything in this, but there is a recognition that, for those of us who were there on Wednesday nights when we read Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, it's crystallized even more clearly in a very famous line of Pirkei Avot, which says, beware of the government because they'll only befriend you when they need you. And so the rabbis were very cognizant of that. They were, of course, talking about the Romans in those days, but they could have been talking about their own government. They could have been talking about, Jewish governments as well. Because this is, we assume this was written during a time of a Jewish king, or at least some type of Jewish authority in the land of Judah, especially if it was written during the Persian period. The Persians were technically in control, but they seem to have let the Jews kind of run their own show. So, we also ascribe it to King Solomon. So, if there are parts of this that go back to times when there were Jewish kings, yeah, most of this is completely relevant and it's still relevant today. All right, so let's read. Rosemary, if you take us through chapter 23.
When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider well who is before you. Thrust a knife into your gullet if you have a large appetite. Do not crave for his dainties, for they are counterfeit food. Do not toil to gain wealth. Have the sense to desist. You see it, then it is gone. It grows wings and flies away like an eagle heavenward. Do not eat of a stingy man's food. Do not crave for his dainties. He is like one keeping accounts. Eat and drink, he says to you, but he does not really mean it. The morsel you eat, you will vomit. You will waste your courteous words. Do not speak to a dullard, for he will disdain your sensible words.
All right, let's actually pause there. Sometimes we read the whole chapter, but let's kind of look at this first section, which seems to be about two different types of people that you might find yourself, or maybe three people that you might be dining with: a ruler, a stingy man, and a dullard. Now, of course, that could all be the same person, but it also could be different types of people. And the caution here for each one is that, again, think about your situation, think about the people that you're around, and control yourself, which is a really interesting idea, one that we definitely could take some lessons for in our day and age, where we tend to overshare and really not respect a filter, an internal filter. But there is something to be said for knowing your surroundings and not necessarily, saying everything that's on your mind, especially given the fact that in some cases it's not going to mean anything. Especially again when you're, trying to share wisdom with someone who doesn't want to hear it or can't hear it. But again, think about who you're eating with. If it's somebody who, invites you to lunch, but is going to be thinking about how much it costs, doesn't make sense unless you really want to send a message to order the most expensive thing on the menu. But again, consider your surroundings, think about the situation you're in, and be sensitive to it. Have some emotional intelligence.
1 through 3, a lesson for me is
Yeah.
the meal before my meal.
So yeah, sometimes, right. Sometimes, yeah, John said have a meal before his meal. I think that that is definitely true, especially if you're really going to be hungry and you're going to a situation where the meal is not really the purpose of it. It's a meeting, right? And we meet over lunch, and you're too focused on the food that you don't realize that's not really what you're there for. And so again, sometimes people do it almost as a test to see, who they're dealing with. All right, the next line, and the next part that we're getting into is actually kind of stepping back into, and we're going to hear a line that we read last time, 2 weeks ago, which is these are very important lines because they're basically, in those days, basic ethics about how you treat people, and not necessarily, again, when we find ourselves eating with the head of a movie studio, but what would happen if we're, again, just doing business in the course of our lives. So here we go.
Do not remove ancient boundary stones. Do not encroach upon the field of orphans, for they have a mighty kinsman, and he will surely take up their cause with you.
And that's a capital K. So that's the big one who will defend those people if you take advantage of them.
Apply your mind to discipline and your ears to wise sayings. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you beat him with a rod, he will not die. Beat him with a rod, and you will save him from the grave.
Yeah, so there's the famous, and we already had a version of this, the famous spare the rod, spoil the child, which here is much, you can see that's not what it says. It's much more, it's much more than that, which is if you beat him, if you discipline him, then he will not die. So is this meant to be literal, or is this just discipline? The first line is definitely discipline. Musar is ethical behavior, teaching somebody right and wrong, etc. But the word in there, shevet, which is used in the next line, which is translated as rod, is a literal staff. It's the thing you walk on, that thing. So it's used other places in the Bible, so we know what the word shevet means. It means a staff. So yeah, it's not a stick. It's not a it's not a slap. It's taking a rod. It's a serious thing, and it is there literally. So of course, people have understood it, interpreted it in a literal and a non-literal way to understand that, again, what it's really talking about is making sure that your children are disciplined and not necessarily disciplined by a beating, but that are disciplined, that they actually on their own are making decisions that are ethical. Because again, the word musar doesn't mean just discipline to hit somebody. It means discipline, meaning controlling ourselves and following a way that, it's ethical, appropriate, traditional, whatever you want to say. The word musar is used in Judaism, as I mentioned before, for ethical behavior. It's also used, as a kind of basic in education in school. Talk about again having discipline and tradition, especially in the Orthodox world, it's used. But yeah, obviously this was used as a proof text for allowing for physical punishment, corporal punishment in families and homes, in schools and communities, that this allows for that type of behavior, or again, in some cases, maybe even encourages it. But again, the first line is, make sure your child has discipline.
When they talk about studying Musar, what books are they talking about studying?
Well, it's a good question. So in the 1800s, I mentioned this too. In the 1800s, Musar developed as as a movement within Judaism. The proponent for it was a rabbi, very famous rabbi named Rabbi Israel Salanter, and he was in Europe in the 1800s. And he taught that the importance of that Judaism needs to focus on ethical behavior. And this was almost like in contrast to the other movements at the time, right? There was no reform. Well, there was Reform Judaism, but it wasn't really, a thing yet. There was no conservative Judaism at all yet. And so what they were really talking about was the Hasidic movements, which were much more focused on feeling and on emotion, and in some ways maybe even would be considered fairly, by our standards today, new agey, which was, let's talk about the spirit, elevating the spirit. Let's talking about, Hasidism was really by the Orthodox, but wasn't called Orthodoxy at the time, but by the more traditional Torah scholars was considered to be not studious, was not considered to be, an important they in the best circumstances they were considered not serious, right? Frivolous. In the worst case, they were considered heretical and considered to be have left the pale of Judaism, in the pale of settlement. They had left the ranch. So you had the Hasidic Jews. You had what were then called by the Hasidic Jews the Mitnagdim, the other side, which were the traditional Orthodox people who believed in studying and going to the academy, and that all the answers were in studying, not in your dancing and singing and your elevated spirit of the Hasidic Jews. And then this other movement, the Musar movement, started and said, you're both wrong to some extent. Well, not you're wrong, but you're focusing on the wrong things, which is that Musar taught you have to focus on ethical behavior. We need to teach people what they're actually supposed to do on a daily basis. Don't worry about what's in the Talmud. Don't worry about your songs and your nigunim and your dances of the Hasids. What you actually need to work on is practical behavior. And so that's what the Musar movement did. And it's had a resurgence in the last few years as people started studying Rabbi Salanter's and his students' texts. He had several students that also wrote what we call Musar texts. So some of those have been translated now. Some of those have been studied by people. And there's a modern Musar movement. But again, when we use it in the Bible, we're really talking about discipline, but more, again, not that comes with being hit, but it comes with control. It comes with following the right direction. It comes from following tradition. So that's what it's used. That's how it's used in the Bible, and it's also used by some of the Orthodox movements who are not intending it to be about the specific Musar movement, but about tradition and about being on the right path, if you will. So obviously this is not my favorite line of the Bible, but the way I understand it is that we have a responsibility to make sure our kids don't go off the rails. This is not tough love. This is, beating a kid. It doesn't say you're supposed to beat him hard, but the alternative, unfortunately, is that if you don't, then he's going to die. And if the choice is between hurting him and dying, it's better to hurt him. And it's a tough one, right? It's a very tough thing to hear. And again, unless you've been in a situation where you're trying to save a kid from death, then you're almost like, hey, I would do just about anything to make sure they didn't die. So it's not just beat your kid so that they do what you tell them to do. Beat them so that they don't die. And again, maybe that's my interpretation, but it is there. It's not like it's not there. Like I added something in the commentary. That's what it says. Both of the lines, and they're obviously a repetitive line, death and the grave. It's not a grave, actually. The word here that's used is Sheol, which we know is the netherworld. It could be translated as, and you will save him from hell. It doesn't, no one translates it like that. I don't know, Reverend Lynn, does yours say what? Sheol? Yeah, that's a better translation. You just transliterated the word Sheol. But yeah, it's not grave. It's from the netherworld, from the dark world. But again, Sheol is not always necessarily the place for evil people, because if it is, that's where Samuel was when he got called up by King Saul. So Sheol is definitely not where you want to be. It's death. It's the netherworld. It's a dark place. It's not where you want to be. So saving a kid from that destruction. And again, look, if you really want to interpret it, you can create a hell on earth, right? The life that they could be living could be a grave. I mean, a drug addiction or behaviors that are essentially almost impossible to get out of become like hell, come like Sheol, whatever you want to call it. So there is that feeling of it's not, but and again, this is all we have. Now, the reason that they translate it as grave is because they don't even want to go that direction and say it's just death. It's synonymous with death. There is no description of what Sheol is like in the Bible, other than it's a dark place and it's not a place that you want to be in. Is it hell? It doesn't seem like it's necessarily hell yet, but again, you'd have a hard time with it being hell, because then you have to explain why Samuel's down there. I mean, there are people who do. I mean, especially later Christian scholars who say he's down there because he didn't have Christ, you know. But I mean, early scholars, I mean, and Jewish scholars would never have said he was there for that. It could have said, you know, he had to go through some kind of purgatory because Samuel wasn't perfect. And, you know, unless you're Moses, you're not getting a straight ticket to, and even Moses wasn't perfect. But yeah, the quicker you can get out of purgatory, the rabbis would have said, the better, the holier your soul was. And we had a long talk about this on Wednesday nights, the last few times. It's not that it contradicts it. It's that by the rabbinic period, it's a foregone conclusion that you're going to purgatory, or at least most people go to purgatory. The line we read last week on Wednesdays was that the world was created for the righteous or for the very wicked, because all of us are really going to the next world where we're going to get our punishment. The righteous and the wicked get punished in this world. No, this stuff comes first, right? So this stuff comes first, and then later on you get a more developed answer. Because as I told you, in the Bible, in the biblical period, it's just not a concern of the people who are reading this and who are teaching this. Again, I believe that they believed that there was a world to come. I'm not saying that. There are people who say, yeah, but it's not there. I said, okay, fine. By the way, I get in arguments, especially with Christian folk all the time, who say that heaven is mentioned all the time in the Bible. I said, no, it's not. If you look at the word Shemaim, every time the word Shemaim is used and you translate it as heaven, you're mistranslating it, because clearly Shemaim is the sky. It's where birds are. So you can't say Shemaim every time the word heaven is used, that it's where we go after we die. So you got to be very careful, because the heavens, the way it's translated in the Bible, every time you look up, it's the heaven. It's the sky above you. It really should be translated as the sky above you. But there is no description of heaven or hell in the Bible. There is no description of it. And the problem that people have is that, you know, they expect it to be there and it's not there. And then they get frustrated because it's not there. I believe that these people believed in it. They didn't focus on it, because their main focus in the Bible is not whether you or I go to heaven or hell. It's whether our world goes to heaven or hell. That's their concern.
I think multiple things. One is that people, if they didn't have some idea of what was to come, doesn't matter what law there was now, chaos would have been, right? Because I don't think humans, for the most part, can control themselves. This is it. Personally.
Yeah.
I do believe that.
So yes, so your idea that heaven or hell creates a sense of fear and people react to it is definitely true. The issue is that becomes a bigger focus when people start talking about religion as a faith system rather than these people it didn't matter whether they had faith or not. You went to the temple to offer a sacrifice. That was your day or week or whatever, whenever you did it. You didn't have a choice. Like we go to synagogue because we feel like we want to go to synagogue because it's going to help us get to heaven or it's the right thing to do or we enjoy whatever it is. That was just what they did. And so when you have a system where your faith is built into your civic duty, you don't think about it. When faith started, like you said, there was a competition for faith ideas, then yes, you need to really focus on those kinds of things. And you're making an argument, hey, you better have faith, otherwise you're going to hell. But at this point, it's not even necessary. So again, maybe one of the reasons why it's not here is it's not a necessary argument to make. They don't have to make an argument for you to have faith. They don't even really talk about it. They don't talk about it from that standpoint. There's nothing in the Bible ever, not in the Hebrew Bible. In the Christian Bible, it's very much there. But this idea that you have to believe in God, otherwise you go to hell, where does it exist in the Bible? You tell me in the Hebrew Bible where it says, if you don't believe in God, you go to hell. It's not there. You've read it, John, you're in 3/4 of the way through. You tell me anywhere you've read, if you don't believe in God, you go to hell. It doesn't exist.
I kept on asking you, and it wasn't until we started getting to these ancillary sources.
Well, till you get to the rabbinic sources. And then the rabbinic sources are written at the same time Christianity did. And they had to define those kind of things. And they had to some extent say, yeah, if you don't do these things, you're going to hell. But yeah, but again, by that point, John, historically, they were already out of their home. They were already living in Babylonia. They were already out of power. They had no civic authority because the Romans had all civic authority. So you couldn't scare people by saying, hey, you're not following the Torah, so we're going to beat you or put you to death. They had no other ability than to tell people, well, yeah, you're not practicing Judaism anymore, you're going to hell. So they had no other choice. And quite frankly, what's the alternative? If you follow the law, you get to live on your land in peace. You're not living on your land in peace anyways. You can't give that to me as a benefit because I don't have it. You know, in Deuteronomy where it says, if you follow the law, you're going to be able to live in the land and you'll be at peace and everything will be okay. You're living under Roman authority. You're living in Babylonia. You're living in Rome. You're living halfway around the world at that time. What are you going to tell me? I get to live in my land? Now you can almost say that again, right? In the modern day Israel, you could say, there's a civic duty to, if we do the right thing, our country survives. Almost say that now. Couldn't say that for 2,000 years. So we might be moving back to a biblical sense of what's really, like you say, what's the motivation? The motivation becomes one of, yeah, if we do the right thing, we get to stay on our land. Maybe the focus won't be on heaven and hell as much. I don't know.
Control.
Yeah, but you can also say this is what's going to happen. There are definitely people who say that's what's going to happen. By the way, that's the difference between religious Zionists in the country today and the average ordinary non-religious Zionist who would say, look, we have to do the right thing because if we don't, we're going to be driven from our land. And the religious Zionists who say, if you give up any piece of the land, we're going to get thrown out. And that's the difference. That's the difference. A Zionist who would say, hey, if we don't live in peace with our neighbors, we're going to get thrown out of our land. Or a religious Zionist who says, if we give up 1 inch of our land, we're going to get thrown out of the land because God didn't give us permission to give it back. You see? That's the challenge today. That's the challenge because you can read the text or understand it completely different ways. Right? All right. But that's where we live today. So here we go. And now we're going to, but the one thing about this whole thing about sparing the rod, all this stuff, You're ostensibly saying that to a young person. The weird thing about this is that you're talking to a young man who hasn't had kids yet, or maybe he's had kids, but they're little kids. This is a generation. This is a father talking to his son when his son either is about to have kids or just had a kid, or think 10 years from now is going to have a kid. These are words said to a kid, which also could be some extent, hey, this is why I was tough on you. Because I want you to make sure that your kid also doesn't go off the rails. But it's very interesting that this is a parent speech. This isn't just some random guy pulling another guy over. This is a father saying this to his son, right? I mean, look at the next line.
My son, if your mind gets wisdom, my mind too will be gladdened. I shall rejoice with all my heart when your lips speak right things.
And as much as I hate the previous lines, I love these lines. Because these lines to me encapsulate everything important about the way in Judaism we treat our families. Which is that when we as parents can look at our children and say, when you're successful, when you have something that you've translated into wisdom or happiness or whatever you want to, whatever word you want to put in there, my son, when you are successful, or when my daughter, when you find love, or all those things, I feel that. I mean, I love that line. I love that line because, and the next line is actually mistranslated, but I don't care. But line 16 is, line 16 is, the first line is definitely lev, which is my heart, my mind, right? So they translate it as mind because it's the word wisdom. And so they like that, but it really is my heart. If your heart gets wisdom, my heart will also be glad, right? That's the translation you probably have, Reverend Lynn, right?
My soul will rejoice when your lips speak what is right.
Yeah, well, what's the line before that? What does it say? My heart or my, yeah. Yeah, so they used heart instead of mind because it's the word lev. But the next line you said has soul. I will rejoice with all my soul. Is there a note for that with that? Well, there's a note actually even here. Literally, it means my kidneys. My kidneys. So this tells us that it wasn't just the heart that had feelings and emotions and reactions. Our kidneys do too. Yeah, we also have a liver that has things attached to it. So yeah, thoughts, the pancreas. Never talk about a pancreas. I've told you that before. No one ever says anything about a pancreas unless it's bad. Never heard anyone say my pancreas, my pancreas. Yeah, people, interestingly, they didn't even bother translating it, right? They just said in the other translations that it's my soul, or this one translated as heart, which it is not heart.
My soul, does that mean how?
Yeah, but again, why kidneys? Why heart? Why? The reality is that in the ancient world, and again, during this biblical period, people thought that these different organs had emotional and, if you will, elements of our soul. So it's not a bad translation in the sense that soul actually conveys it closer than my heart. Because heart, are you going to translate every part of your body that has an emotion as heart? I don't know. It's not accurate, and it's not what heart is. Look, this is why the Egyptians had those little canopic, those things. They pulled out those organs because they believed that if you had those organs from somebody, you had the essence of them, right? So they would take out their internal organs and save them in a little jar, right? Because those were where those essences were. That's also reflected here, and we believe that these internal organs had an essence to them. Look, the more we learn about the body and the endocrine system and the way that there's how this loop that we have in our bodies, it's really not it's actually maybe more accurate. We have never found these components to make directly into who we are as an individual, but we know that, you know, the play of hormones and chemicals in our body affects who we are. So there's an interesting idea here, which I think is somewhat obscured, which is that our bodies obviously feel these things. And look at how important it is that when our children are successful and when they have good things happening to them, and of course, in Proverbs, the focus is on wisdom. So they're going to, of course, focus on that. But we feel it. We don't just say how happy we are. The feeling is actually one that we physically feel. And I think that that's such a beautiful idea that we can actually feel internally in our bodies that sense of pride and that sense of, unfortunately, in some cases, the sense of hurt when they're hurt, that we actually feel that. And I think this really conveys this value that we have of caring for our families and feeling our families' pains and successes. So yeah, as much as I really don't like the previous two lines, think about it, folks. You know, everyone can pick out the bad lines, but look at the context. Look at the full context here. So, all right. So
Pleased to the notion. The salvation is not individual, collective.
yeah, it's such an important idea in Judaism. I've said this before. That is the message of Deuteronomy. It's the message, at least, of the Torah. The later parts of the book of the Bible start to focus a little bit, and again, we're going to get into the next one with Job, with this manifestation of kind of like, well, what is our own personal theology? What's our own things, our struggles, our stuff that we're dealing with. It becomes much more personalized by the time we get to Job and definitely, if not Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, which we're also going to read soon. But originally the focus is completely collective. You cannot get through the first 5 books without understanding that, again, by the end of the book, by the end of the books, by the end of the Torah, the focus, the lesson is, what do we do as a community? We're going to rise and fall as a community. It's not about us and about me, it's about us. And I think about that all the time because, look, I don't know what happens after we die, but I do know that, you know, if we don't succeed on a collective level, the legacy that we have, which we know we have, that's the one thing we can do. That's the thing we do know, is if we're having success or failure as a collective. That's the one thing I know. Anyways, yeah, it's definitely something I was thinking about yesterday on a day that a lot of people were focused on just the inauguration, but I hope people did not obscure the fact that yesterday, I mean, I had a funeral yesterday. I'm going to another funeral today, but I had a funeral yesterday, and you know, look, I didn't talk about the inauguration. I mean, I don't know. Well, that's not appropriate anyways, but I did talk about Dr. King yesterday. I did talk about the fact that when we think about the legacy of somebody who believed that America could reach a better future, and, you know, this idea of dreaming on a prophetic level of the fact that, you know, I might not get to see it, but I got to hope that my kids have a better world. That I definitely was thinking about yesterday, because we can't give up on that. We can't give up on that faith, and it's a tough one because, you know, I saw an interview on Sunday with Dr. King's son, Dr. King, you know, the third. Talk about a tough legacy to have that last name. But, you know, he was thinking about his life now, because he's an older guy now, and he's thinking about what he's going to leave behind. But it's a very biblical notion, which is, I want my kids to have a better world. I want my grandkids to have a better world. I want the future to be better. That's a biblical idea. And I think it's it's one of the successes, I've said this before, where the Jewish people have been successful as a group is this idea that our kids can do better. Not to say, well, it was better back then, you know, but you can do better. I've said this before. I've said it a lot, but I've said it before. I've said it to my kids. when I've had moments where I could talk to them like this, like Proverbs. I love my dad, and I was very close to my dad. But my dad, by his own admission, was not a phenomenal father in the sense of like doing the things that a father can and should do in some ways. But you know what he said to me? He says, "You got to do better." He didn't say, "Do as good as I did." He didn't say, "Repeat my mistakes." He said, "Do better. You know, be a better father." And he didn't say it in like, "I failed." He said, "You're going to do better." Like he believed I would do better. So it was an important lesson. And I tell them too. I tell them, you do better than me. So if we impart that to our kids, then we're essentially telling them, we're not looking backwards. And again, that's, if I take any exception with the inauguration yesterday and with the whole campaign, I have no exception with a president or anybody saying, let's do better. But I don't say, hey, let's take America backwards. I don't want to go back again. I want to go forward. I mean, it's not that there were not good things in the past, but the idea that that was the best time, that's not a Jewish concept, folks. I would say it's not a biblical concept. It's not, I don't think it's a biblical concept. It's
But those two events happened the same day. So ironic.
Yeah, and it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson of telling people, look, we always have a history. I love history. No one loves history more than I do. But I'm telling you, if I have a choice between going forward or going back in time, I'd go forward. I want to make sure, I hope that we survive. I want to hope that we survive and we do better. I mean, I'd love to see the past, but I want to know that there's a future. So, and you got to hope. And that, that's what, look, everyone rode, and believe me, I was not happy with Dave Chappelle's monologue, the anti-Israel aspects of it, if you will. But his message at the end was, hey, look, Trump, do better this time. And even if you don't like Chappelle, even if you don't like Trump, if you don't like this, that's a good message. Do better, Trump. I mean, if you think that was the best, if you think that what you did 4 years ago was the best, come on. Everybody should say that. Any president should say that.
When you hear something.
Yeah. Again, it's this idea of teaching the next generation. And that is definitely, as I said, the message of Proverbs. So let us continue. We went on a little tangent.
Do not envy sinners in your heart, but only God-fearing men at all times, for then you will have a future and your hope will never fail. Listen, my son, and get wisdom. Lead your mind in a proper path. Do not be of those who guzzle wine or glut themselves on meat, for guzzlers and gluttons will be impoverished, and drowsing will clothe you in tatters. Listen to your father who begot you. Do not disdain your mother when she is old. Buy truth and never sell it, and wisdom, discipline, and understanding. The father of a righteous man will exult. He who begets a wise son will rejoice in him. Your father and mother will rejoice. She who bore you will exult. Give your mind to me, my son. Let your eyes watch my ways. A harlot is a deep pit. A forbidden woman is a narrow well. She too lies in wait as if for prey and destroys the unfaithful among men. Who cries woe? Who, alas? Who has quarrels? Who complains? Who has wounds without cause? Who has bleary eyes? Those whom wine keeps till the small hours, those who gather to drain the cups. Do not ogle that red wine as it lends its color to the cup, as it flows on smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake. It spits like a basilisk. Your eyes will see strange sights. Your heart will speak distorted things. You will be like one lying in bed on high seas, like one lying on top of the rigging. They struck me, but I felt no hurt. They beat me, but I was unaware. As often as I wake, I go after it again.
Yeah. That's a little bit of, the last part is really kind of a meditation on, uh, the behavior of people kind of going off the deep end, right? Drinking, partying, hanging out with harlots, right?
Why is that?
Yeah, it does.
Why is that the deep end? That was college.
I understand. And now we have a way where people hopefully get that out of their system. Unfortunately, it's not always easy for people to get that out of their system. So yeah, we tend to be tolerant of people when they're in college and we've created a space for that. But yeah, it's a tough one. And it also, again, some people can't emerge from that. They don't want to emerge from it. And so, look, it's a wonderful description of, as Reverend Lynn said, the drowsiness that comes from alcohol, but also, oh my gosh, the people the room is spinning, right? The room is spinning. You're like on a line on a bed in the high seas. It's just, oh, I can't. This is a description of the bad parts of drinking and, yeah, and overeating, gluttony. Yeah. So those are things that go together. Yeah, oftentimes. And we've read it a few times in Proverbs that gluttony and drink go together. And again, we open that chapter with a reflection on dining with kings and dining with stingy people. And we finish with, again, the self-control that somebody has. Again, all of this stuff is very relevant. It's all stuff that has never stopped. A parent warning their child of not going off the deep end. That's definitely what we have here. Is Judith, oh, by the way, type before you. You're only as happy as your least happy child. Yes, that is not in Proverbs, but should be. Is definitely, again, something that has the intention of this, reminding us that as a parent, you want your child to be happy, but again, not to lose control. And again, this idea that as parents, we get so much joy from our children when they are successful and happy, and they're making good decisions. And this is obviously for both parents. It's fathers and mothers. Of course, the equivalent today would definitely be daughters who go to college and have careers. And we're going to talk about women in Proverbs. Don't worry, we're going to get to it. But you can already see that the mother, though, is also important for the as a parent, as someone who is part of the guidance and learning. Of course, the interesting thing about Proverbs, we also have women depicted on the dark side, especially a woman who is a harlot. She's the description of it is quite graphic, or the imagery is very powerful, right? She becomes the hole, if you will, that you fall into. That is the understanding there.
It's interesting that verse 27, for a prostitute is a deep pit.
Yeah.
An adulteress is a narrow well.
Yeah.
The adulteress here, a possible translation, I guess, was alien.
Yes.
Which is
Yes.
very interesting.
Yes. So it says a forbidden woman. That's why it's translated here with the note. You can see up there is alien. The word nochriah means literally a foreign woman. Yeah, it is probably not from that standpoint from another country, though it is used definitely in that context. When Moses says, I was a stranger in a strange land, the words are Eretz Nochriah. I was a stranger in a strange land. Ger Haiti be'Eretz Nochriah. So it definitely means a foreign land. But here, I actually like the translation as forbidden because it is a woman who is not your woman. It is a woman who is not yours. She's foreign to you, not in the sense necessarily, it doesn't have to be literally that she's from another country, but that she is not your wife. So that's why it's sometimes translated as an adulterous woman, because it's a woman who's married to someone else. She's foreign because she is forbidden. She's on another team, if you will. So she's not supposed to, and again, some people have translated, most definitely, some people have translated it as women who are not Jewish. There's no question people translate it. Could be understood that way. Could be. Could be. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, that's what I said. The imagery is quite graphic. A deep pit and then a narrow well. Now, they're saying neither one are things you want to fall into. And the imagery is it's quite sexual, and it's also it's very clever. It's very clever. Very graphic and very clever. Because either one obviously are bad. Neither one are things you want to fall into. But a narrow well, assumedly, is a narrow well. It's so narrow that you can't climb out of it. The other one is so deep that it's a pit. It's something you've fallen into, which you're also never going to get out of. Neither one of them are easy to get. They're both fatal, if you will, but they're fatal for slightly different reasons. And what's interesting, of course, is that the sexual imagery used in it is not lost on people. Rosemary, what did you think of line 32? I'm so glad you got to read that today.
I was wondering what the Hebrew word is being translated as basilisk.
Yes, so it's this word right here, tzephoni, or tsephah. Yeah, they went really wild with basilisk. Of course, the basilisk, Rosemary knows what a basilisk is.
Yes, a basilisk is a sort of a mythical snake monster. There's one in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
There you go. There's your basilisk. That's why so happy that Rosemary got to be here today to read about it. Yeah, the problem is that it's a very, look, the word Tsephah or Tzephoni is definitely some kind of snake. The fact that they used this translation for basilisk, and I looked to see if they did that with the other places that it's used in Isaiah, it's used in Jeremiah. Usually it's translated as snake. So the fact that they went with this one, so there's a few words that we have for snake in the Bible. Nachash, we have Piton, which is like Python, right? Same cognate. Nachash is the word that's used the most. That's the one that's used when we talk about the snake in the Eden story and the tree. That's a Nachash.
This is adder.
Yeah, it's usually translated. Yes, your translation has adder. A lot of translations use adder for that word. Yeah, they went with the mythological one, which again,
In the garden, which is the snake.
it's Nachash. It's Nachash. It's not a basilisk. It's not a python. It's a Nachash. It's the standard word for snake. So it's not the second word. Look, it's definitely poetic. To me, adder is a much better translation because it's juxtaposed with the snake. So I don't know why you had to go to basilisk. I think maybe because they use the word spit for it. That's why they went with that translation. Yafrosh, it didn't use the bite, which they have there as yishach, which is also going to be a kiss, but a bite. I mean, to me, they're snakes that spit. Basilisks were dangerous because they didn't just bite you or spit at you, but what else could they do to you, Rosemary?
They turn you to stone.
And they just had to look at you.
You're right.
Really
They
dangerous.
have
Basilisks,
dangerous gazes.
yes, basilisks could just look at you. But look, I mean, it does say spit. It doesn't say look at you. So
Mhm.
I don't know. To me, it's kind of a weird translation that they went with, especially since this translation, again, I looked at it in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 8, they used adder. They didn't use, and that's an interesting imagery in Isaiah, because that's where it says that a kid can put his hand over snakes, over a den of vipers, or however it translates it, whatever your translation says for that, which is a weird thing, which leads to, of course, that whole snake handling business where
Mhm.
people use that as a sign of faith. But there they didn't use some fantastic mythological basilisk, but yeah, sting. That's a yeah, I like spit, but I think it's really spit. But they went with a very clear, snakes don't sting, so I don't think that's really a good translation. We don't usually work. I don't think I've never, like, stings are like stingrays or like other kinds of animals that have a stinger on them, like a scorpion. What? Yeah. Oh yeah. There are snakes that spit. There's a spitting cobra, right?
Mhm.
Rosemary?
Yes, yeah, they spit venom.
Yeah. So I mean, you could, what? She's into everything. Rosemary knows about all things. But Rosemary definitely knows about basilisks. I knew she would know and be ready for the
And
basilisk.
they're supposedly hatched from a hatched from a chicken egg that's magically incubated, and then it's I'm trying to remember, but yeah, it definitely kills you just by looking at you.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't think that was that necessary, but you understand this is all compared to alcohol.
Right.
Alcohol.
They're trying to say that that alcohol has, a supernatural power, really.
Yeah, that's true. But again, the bite or there's
Mhm.
actually alcohol. You can yeah, there actually is something called a snake bite. It's a popular drink in
I
in England.
love them. They're fabulous.
What is it? What's a snake bite, Judith?
Snake bite is lager and hard cider,
Correct. Yeah,
sometimes with a splash of black currant.
correct. So here's the snake bite in England. Equal parts cider and lager or stout.
No,
Black
it's
currant,
stout is gross. It's got
I
to
know.
be lager.
Black currant cordial for a diesel or a snake bite of
It's
black.
snake bite and currant.
Yeah.
You know,
So
it's
that's
that. No.
Sounds awful.
no
It
no
doesn't
no
it
no
sound
no
awful? That's my
no.
first thought. It was delicious. I
Trust me,
lived on those
snake
for
bite. If you have hard cider, if it's cider and lager,
cider and lager.
it's not good with stout. It's not good with stout. Trust me, if it's the right lager and it's got a good dry cider, it's a good drink. I mean, I can tell you and they call it a snake bite because it sneaks up on you. You know, you don't think it's that strong, but the combination of the two alcohols, it's
The
called.
sugar and the cider. Oh my God, they're awesome.
Yeah, I've had them. I mean, it's a big college drink. It's a big college drink in England. So I would say,
The
yeah,
rumor was that during World War II, they were actually banned in parts of England.
I believe it.
That's the rumor.
I believe it.
Those
So
were banned?
certain drinks, yeah, certain drinks because they were too strong. Look, absinthe was banned here, wasn't it? I think it was banned. It was either banned or
Huh, yeah, it was.
what?
I remember that it was banned because my mother, when we went very early on, when I was a kid, my mother we were in Paris and my mother wanted to try it, and my father was scandalized.
The green fairy. I don't like it. It tastes to me. I don't like that licorice taste. But yeah, you can get it now. They used to think it had more hallucinogenic properties, but it was artists and creative folk drank it, right? So anyways, that's a little bit of alcohol. And it was the beginning and end, and it was in last week's too. So it definitely is a cautionary look. We're not gonna, you know, we will say that in Judaism, alcohol was never forbidden like it is in some faiths, but it was also discouraged from the sense of partaking in it too much. And it was considered to be a,
Except on Purim.
not Jewish behavior. On the other hand, of course, as much as that, look, it was a pressure not to be a drunkard or a glutton because of those cautionary words, and again, in some cultures, it was not. It was tolerated or even encouraged. Judaism didn't encourage it, didn't tolerate it to some extent, and that definitely kept alcoholism from being at a lower level within the Jewish community. It is problematic today because of the fact that for Jews who are battling alcoholism, which again, if you live in a culture where alcoholism is not, or alcohol usage and overusage is not frowned upon in the same way, if you're a Jew who, lives in both communities, like most of us do, it created some very difficult situations for Jewish alcoholics because they felt really abandoned by their community, especially again 30, 40 years ago when Jews started being more incorporated in the community, started, engaging in behavior that was totally accepted by the general public. And then again, if they happen to be either have a predisposition or for whatever reason had found themselves to be battling with an addiction, they were very marginalized by the community. And so it was very hard to find AA groups in synagogues. Now that's not the case. One of the largest AA groups in the country is at University Synagogue, which is now Wilshire Boulevard West in Brentwood. And so fortunately there are AA groups in synagogues, but used to never find them. We always had them because I felt like we had to make sure that message wasn't there, that there wasn't a place in the Jewish community for people who were battling addiction. And again, it's the right thing to do. But there was a very famous Yiddish phrase that you might have heard as a kid, which we definitely don't say today. And I'm hesitant to even say it today because it is such a offensive saying. But we had offensive Yiddish sayings. Many of them were offensive. They're actually meant to be offensive. Yes, Judith?
I was just going to say that it used to be at Jewish weddings, they just didn't drink as much. Like if you went to a non-Jewish caterer and they would say, well, you're going to need this and you're going to need this. And they're like, yeah, no, we're not, because Jews just didn't, at a wedding, you just didn't.
Yes, it's less the case. It's less the case now. Is that what you're going to say, Judith?
Yes, it is less the
Well,
case.
what's the famous Yiddish saying that we say that we shouldn't say?
I don't know.
A shicker is a goy. A horrible phrase, right?
Horrible.
Because it literally is saying an alcoholic, which is a shicker, right? Is somebody who's an alcoholic, is not Jewish. A shicker is a goy. It's a horrible phrase. It's one that makes me bristle. But the reality is that's what was said. And when you said that, of course, you were obviously, the intent was to marginalize the people by saying you're not really part of the community. So, oh no, there are definitely worse things to say, but that was one that I heard as a kid, and it's definitely not the case now. For better or worse, there's definitely a lot more Jews that are battling addiction, but there also are fortunately less stigmatized. You almost have to have both, right? It's very hard to have one and not the other. So it's less stigmatized, but it's also obviously a lot more common. And I will tell you that in my own lifetime, Judith, I've seen Jewish weddings go from teetotaler affairs to debaucherous occasions. In my own lifetime.
Your own lifetime.
At the same night.
Yeah. You had two different parties, huh? There was a party and then an after party.
Right.
That's the way it used to be. Now it's the whole thing. No, I went to a wedding 3 weeks ago, my cousin's wedding in the desert, and there was a lot of drinking. Yeah, well, it used to not be the case. That wedding 2 generations ago, maybe some
And
wine.
you don't need to drink to have fun.
I agree.
We did.
I'm just saying, that's what happened. All right, well, let's go to finish with this chapter today, Rosemary, and there's gonna be a line in here that's gonna make you bristle when you read it, because, oh my gosh, all right.
Okay. Do not envy evil men. Do not desire to be with them, for their hearts talk violence and their lips speak mischief. A house is built by wisdom and is established by understanding. By knowledge are its rooms filled with all precious and beautiful things. A wise man is strength, a knowledgeable man exerts power. For by stratagems you wage war, and victory comes with much planning. Wisdom is too lofty for a fool. He does not open his mouth in the gate. He who lays plans to do harm is called by men a schemer. The schemes of folly are sin, and a scoffer is an abomination to men. If you showed yourself slack in time of trouble, wanting in power, if you refrain from rescuing those taken off to death, those condemned to slaughter, if you say, we knew nothing of it, surely he who fathoms hearts will discern the truth. He who watches over your life will know it, and he will pay each man as he deserves.
Yeah. That's a tough thing to hear, especially when when we see this happening. We haven't even gotten into it yet. Because yeah, we lived through this. We've seen this happen in our own lifetime. We've aided and abetted it. But look at this.
My son, eat honey, for it is good. Let its sweet drops be on your palate. Know such wisdom for your soul. If you attain it, there is a future. Your hope will not be cut off. Wicked man, do not lurk by the home of the righteous man. Do no violence to his dwelling. 7 times the righteous man falls and gets up, while the wicked are tripped by one misfortune.
That's an
I
interesting,
wish.
that's an interesting one though. But there is something interesting about this, which again is this idea that
I agree that being righteous contributes to resilience, but
but it also, again, it gives you resilience, knowing again that you're doing the right thing. You should be encouraged by that. And people are. I mean, there are people who are, and they don't stop. Here you go.
if your enemy falls, do not exult. If he trips, let your heart not rejoice, lest the Lord see it and be displeased and avert his wrath from him.
That's also important for people to hear and for people to take into to mind, especially now, especially people who are again watching and waiting and wanting for failure. Yeah, it's an interesting line. Here we go.
Do not be vexed by evildoers. Do not be incensed by the wicked, for there is no future for the evil man. The lamp of the wicked goes out. Fear the Lord, my son, and the king, and do not mix with dissenters, for disaster comes from them suddenly. The doom both decree, who can foreknow? These are also by the sages. It is not right to be partial in judgment. He who says to the guilty, you are innocent, shall be cursed by peoples, damned by nations. But it shall go well with them who decide justly. Blessings of good things will light upon them.
Yeah, that's my line for the day.
Yep.
He who says to the guilty.
That's it.
Yeah, that's a tough one, folks, because what we saw in the last week on both sides of the hill, both sides of both sides of power, has been astounding. It's almost as if the message that we have been given by our leaders today is, once you're in power, you can wipe away the sins of the people that are on your side. And this is deeply troubling because, yeah, I never thought that, look, you can't be naive to think that this kind of stuff didn't go on in our country for forever. But what we've done so blatantly and so obviously and so without any regard. So, you know, I said to myself, like, is it my imagination, or is like, have we gone, like, the things that I'm seeing now are things that I would have thought, you know, happened in Peru or Bolivia, you know, some, you know, like dictatorship where you like, oh yeah, that's what they do. The only thing we're missing right now is literally a military, you know, people with crazy uniforms that show up at these things too and stand by the dictator. That's like the only thing we're missing right now. Because if you look at this, I know I wanted to really like, is it me or like? So I started looking at presidential pardons, and I knew something was weird, right? And so, you know, in the last like during my lifetime, you know, you had like 500 or so people that would be pardoned by a president, but it really went down a lot during Reagan's and Bush's time, and then it started in Obama's administration. It started going back up. What's interesting about these is that, so I looked at this and like Jimmy Carter pardoned all these people who were Vietnam draft dodgers, which again, if you think that what he did was not correct, just understand that when I went back and looked, Franklin Roosevelt, look how many people he pardoned. Look how many people, you know, Woodrow Wilson pardoned compared to the other people. It was war pardons. These, and I looked it up. These were war pardons. These were people who pardoned conscientious objectors and people who refused to serve. It happened both in World War I, happened in World War II, and it happened in the Vietnam War. So it did happen. It wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like it hadn't happened before. But when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, that was a major thing, you know, and people thought, hey, you know, that was a thing that brought healing. That was a thing that was an abuse of power. That was a, you know, you helped somebody in your party, all of those kinds of things that people, you know, had said when that happened, but not like this. I mean, not the things that, you know, not the things that happened. Now, again, Joe Biden pardoned a lot of people for marijuana possession, which like to me makes sense from the standpoint that, you know, we seem to have crossed most of the country now allowed for marijuana possession. So that doesn't seem ridiculous. But this also doesn't include people that he pardoned just in the last few days. So and look at what happened with Trump. Trump didn't pardon anybody in his first term. He pardoned 230 people in his first term. But on the first day in office, of course, he pardoned 1,500 people for January 6th. So what we see is there's definitely something happening here. This is real.
Misuse of power.
Yeah. Again, is this the worst misuse of power? I'm not saying it is, but this is a blatant use of or misuse of power where we would have said before, you can't do that. And now it's being done all over the place. And I don't know how you get the genie back in the bottle. But the interesting thing is, what I do want to tell you is it can be done. It can be done. We shouldn't despair that this is what's going to happen forever. Because I want to show you the most, like you think that like, I hope I've showed you that this is not a history lesson, but I'm just showing you that this is real. But I want to show you something that if you think that this is bad, well, maybe you don't think this is bad, but I'm going to show it to you. I think it's kind of bad. Look at the president who pardoned, really, kind of in a way, the most people. Look at this guy. Andrew Johnson pardoned 7,600 people that were Confederate generals and people who fought against this country. Now, again, I know I'm a Northerner. I get it. I'm a person who believed in this guy, Abraham Lincoln, who only pardoned 300 people during his 2 terms. But this guy pardoned all these Confederate soldiers. Now, again, maybe some of them should have been pardoned because they were, they were soldiers that were conscripted or whatever. But my guess is that Andrew Johnson, who was the person who almost single-handedly turned back the Reconstruction, he did something more egregious than January 6th.
Are you upset at the pardons? Or are you upset?
I'm
at-
upset. I'm
Let me
upset.
finish that thing. Are
Yeah.
you upset at the trier of fact for causing a situation to require pardons?
I would say the whole system sucks. The whole system sucks because
People are doing
because
anything they can
because
to say that-
because if you are in a situation where your presidential authority is essentially being used to help the people who are on your side, we're doomed. We're doomed with that type of usage of power. I think, and I think, look, I think there were legitimate arguments against Biden pardoning his son.
The fact that it's in Proverbs and it was written
Yeah.
so long ago shows that this has been an issue.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
From the beginning of.
Yes.
Of time.
Yes. The fact is that power is used. We know that power corrupts. We know that this is a timeless situation. The important thing I want to share with you is that it can be put back in the bottle. There were, whether you like the guy or not, Ronald Reagan stopped the process of, put it back down of giving presidential pardons. We're going to have to do that. There's going to have to be a president. I don't care if he's a Republican, a Democrat, libertarian, whatever that person is. There's going to be after somebody who's going to have to undo this. You're going to have to step in and say, this is an abuse of power. We did it. There's no law. If all I can do is, once I have power, is undo and say you're innocent.
But it's deeper than that, because the fabric of society goes back to what we were just discussing in the prior Proverbs. Will chaos reign if there's no belief that, we need to act good today? So, it's a very deep.
But how about the fact that this is here, folks? We were cautioned by this thousands of years ago. And I just wonder, again, I believe it. I believe in American exceptionalism. I'm one of those people who's liberal about a lot of things, but I believe this country is an amazing country. And I believe when other countries look at us and see that we can't get it together, it sends the wrong message to the rest of the world. This is a country that really is a light to the nations. I really believe that. And when we aren't, we become cursed by peoples. They look at us and say, they can't do it. They're not doing it. It's a bad example because it tells everybody else they can behave like this. I don't know. It's my take on it. Let's finish up this chapter. What?
See how long this.
We got to fix it. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. It won't happen unless we demand that it happens as people who live in this country, to say we have laws. They got to be followed by everybody, including the people who are in office.
Presidential pardons begin? I mean, it's not a constitutional issue.
So I will tell you this. I haven't done a full deep dive in it, but it's something that, like I said, I had to look it up. I had to find out if I'm nuts. But it really started at the very beginning, because George Washington started giving pardons. He gave 16 pardons, just so you know. John Adams gave 20. But by the time we got to James Monroe, it popped up to 419. Now, the country also grew, but clearly something happened between the 20 that John Adams did and the 400 that Monroe did. But again, it never got out of the 400s, 300s to 400s until Andrew Johnson, until 7,600 people were pardoned by him. And I'll tell you, the next president, Ulysses Grant, only pardoned 1,300 people. So I'm telling you, it can be undone, but it's going to take somebody to put it back in the bottle. So I'm saying, look, these presidents, our first presidents, all the way through Abraham Lincoln, 343.
But isn't that something of a monarchy? I mean,
Yes, you're right. Because the whole concept that a president has the power to issue a pardon it's a holdover from that. And but the Supreme Court has decided on it and said that there's a presidential prerogative that allows him to do that. It is weird. It seems to go against their power. Seems to go against the Supreme Court's power. Terrible. Anyways, let's finish up this chapter. We're almost done. I'm telling you right now, it sets a bad example, and we have to think about that for our country. All right. Take care, Reverend Lynn. We'll see you. All right.
Giving a straightforward reply is like giving a kiss. Put your external affairs in order. Get ready what you have in the field, then build yourself a home. Do not be a witness against your fellow without good cause. Would you mislead with your speech? Do not say, I will do to him what he did to me. I will pay the man what he deserves. I passed by the field of a lazy man, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense. It was all overgrown with thorns, its surface was covered with chickweed, and its stone fence lay in ruins. I observed and took it to heart. I saw it and learned a lesson. A bit more sleep, a bit more slumber, a bit more hugging yourself in bed, and poverty will come calling upon you, and want like a man with a shield.
Yeah. That's the end of that section, because the next section, the final section we're going to read, are clearly another section. It begins with the words, these are two Proverbs of Solomon, right? Which the men of King Hezekiah copied, which, by the way, tells you that at least, it was written down in King Hezekiah's time, which means, was it written during King Hezekiah's time, or did they even, anyways, it's clearly a different part of a book. But this book ends with again, some of the ideas that we've read throughout, not being a false witness, how dangerous that is. And again, something that we've read before, where we read the line, consider the ant, the ant who seems to have some good sense when it comes to taking care of itself. Yeah, if we work hard and if we are not lazy, that we can be successful. You look at somebody who is lazy and kind of somebody who's, the word that they use, chasar lev, which could also be just kind of, again, faint-hearted or weak-hearted, there's a consequence to that. So you look at it, you see what's going on, you see what's happening in the world, you'll see what happens, which is that you got to work hard. It's very easy to say, stay in bed. It's very easy to say, I'm going to hit the snooze bar, stay in bed a little bit longer, hugging myself in bed. That's the word that's used. Hibok yadayim. I'm hugging the bed. So you can imagine somebody just getting all comfortable in their bed and it's time to get out. So yeah, even in those days, people didn't want to get out of bed, especially on a cold morning. And there's so many excuses. I don't want to get up. I don't want to work out. I'll take off class this week. Well, thankfully, at least quite a few people are here today. We're glad that you're here. And next week, we're not in session. We're wrapping up a little early. I have a funeral that I'm heading off to today for before we go to Israel. And again, the next couple of weeks will be in Israel. But when we come back, we'll read the last few chapters. My guess is that we actually might be reading Proverbs for 2 more weeks, because chapter 25 and 26 are kind of, same length, about 30 verses. But then when we get to one of the last chapters, which is a very famous chapter, it's Eshet Chayil. It's the woman of valor chapter. And that's coming up here. But what's interesting about the woman of valor is that it begins with another text, and then or another part of another message, if you will. And then in verse 10, we get into the woman of valor. And that's the way it ends. That's the way Proverbs ends. Interestingly, in the Septuagint, these last appendices aren't even there. So these were either later editions or editions that were not in every copy of Proverbs, but it's some of the more, if not the most famous part of Proverbs. It's definitely the most famous chapter of Proverbs, but there are other lines we said in Proverbs that are pretty well known. But when we get to those last chapters, again, those were almost seen as I wouldn't say everyone sees them that way, but they're kind of appendices. They're kinds of maybe other wisdom texts that were tacked on. We don't know for sure, but the fact that it isn't in some of these other copies of ancient versions of Proverbs, we got to take that in consideration. So, yeah, we will see you guys in a few weeks. If not tomorrow night, we have our class on the Talmud, which is now moving out of the tractate on brachot. So we're going to be reading other parts of the Talmud, not necessarily having to hew to the tractates, the sections. And so we'll be doing that for the time being. But again,
When is our next Tuesday class?
next Tuesday will be February the 11th. I think that's the date. Or no, February. It's the 11th. That's the date. It's a Tuesday. February is it's hard to believe that February is upon us, but yes, we've already moved through the first month almost of this year. So not been a great start, my friends. Spent 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks dealing with fires, and believe me, the fallout is still there for some of us who are still, trying to figure out where we're even going to live. Like I mentioned last night, John was on our Israel trip. My buddy John doesn't even know where he's going to be living. I mean, of course, it only happened 2 weeks ago, but he still doesn't even know where he's going to be living. He might be living, he told me last night, in Venice. So yeah, I have a feeling that it's going to be a hard slog for some of these people just to find housing, because there isn't a lot of it and it's not affordable, unfortunately. And I imagine that the prices are going to go up. So, all right, folks, on a happier note, we'll see you soon. And
Travel safe. Those of you
Safe
going,
travels.
be well.
thank you. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you soon. We'll be praying for you from the Kotel, from Israel. Bye-bye.